The cantina on Harmony's Edge was never quiet, but tonight it felt different. Commander Zethka sat in his usual corner booth, forearms wrapped around a glass of synthol that had gone warm hours ago. The blue liquid reflected the dim lights above, casting strange shadows across his scarred face. Zethka was a Valorian, one of the proud warrior race that had once ruled half the galaxy. His people stood 8 feet tall with thick armor-like skin and 4 powerful arms that could crush steel. They were born fighters bred for war, trained from birth to be perfect soldiers, but the scars that covered Zethka's body told a different story than the one most people expected. 3 young Valorian cadets entered the cantina, their fresh uniforms bright against the smoky air. They moved with the confidence of youth, talking loudly about their upcoming graduation from the military academy. Their eyes swept the room until they found what they were looking for. "Commander Zethka," the tallest cadet said, approaching the table with excitement. "Sir, we recognize you from the war memorials. You commanded the 47th Strike Force during the Human War." Zethka looked up slowly. His eyes were tired, much older than his 45 years. The scars on his face seemed to deepen in the dim light. "That was a long time ago," he said quietly. "Sir, we're about to graduate. We've studied all the great battles," another cadet said, practically bouncing with energy. "The academy taught us about Valorian tactics and honor in combat. But they never tell us the real stories about fighting humans." The third cadet leaned forward. "They say humans were primitive. No real weapons, no proper military training. How did the war last 3 years? Our teachers say you won every major battle." Zethka stared at his drink for a long moment. Other conversations in the cantina seemed to fade away. The young cadets waited, expecting tales of glorious victory and brave charges against weak enemies. "Sit down," Zethka said finally. His voice was rough, like metal grinding against stone. "But understand something first. What I'm going to tell you are not stories of glory. They are not tales that will make you proud to be Valorian warriors." The cadets exchanged glances but sat down anyway. They had dreamed of this moment, of hearing real war stories from a real veteran. "You want to know about fighting humans?" Zethka asked. He took a sip of his warm synthol and grimaced. "The academy taught you that we won every major battle. That's true. We destroyed their fleets. We conquered their worlds. We killed millions of them." His voice dropped lower. "But we lost the war. And after you hear what I have to say, you'll understand why." The tallest cadet frowned. "But sir, the history books say we achieved total victory. Humans surrendered and agreed to stay in the Outer Rim territories." Zethka laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The history books lie, boy. Or at least they don't tell the whole truth. Yes, humans stopped fighting, but not because we defeated them. They stopped fighting because they had achieved something much worse than victory." He finished his drink and signaled for another. The server, a small green-skinned alien, hurried over with a fresh glass. She glanced at the scarred Valorian with something that looked like respect mixed with fear. "I was there for 3 of the biggest battles." Zethka continued. "Terra's Garden, Proxima Station, and the final assault on Earth itself. Each time we went in expecting easy victory. Each time we came out unchanged." The second cadet leaned forward eagerly. "Changed how, sir?" "You'll see," Zethka said. "But first, let me tell you something about humans that the academy won't teach you. They're not like us. They're not like any species in the galaxy. Most races fight wars to win territory, resources, or power. Humans fight wars to teach lessons." He paused, watching the confusion on their young faces. "We Valorians are warriors," he continued. "We fight with honor, following ancient codes of battle. We respect our enemies and show mercy to the defeated. We believe war is about proving who is stronger, who deserves to rule." The cantina seemed to grow quieter around them. Other patrons had stopped their own conversations to listen, though they pretended not to. "Humans don't fight to prove they're stronger," Zethka said. "They fight to prove that some things are worth dying for. And more importantly, they fight to prove that some things are worth making your enemies die for." The third cadet looked uncomfortable. "Sir, I don't understand. All species fight for things they believe in." "No," Zethka said firmly. "All species fight for things they want to keep. Humans fight for things they're willing to lose. There's a difference, and it changes everything about how war works." He gestured to his scars with one of his forearms. "You see these marks? Each one has a story. Each one taught me something about human warfare that I wish I had never learned." The young Valorian stared at the crisscrossing lines that covered their commander's arms and face. Some looked like weapon burns, others like cuts from blades. But there were stranger marks too, ones that didn't look like they came from any weapon they recognized. The first thing you need to understand, Zethka said, is that humans don't have armies. They have populations that can become armies. Every human civilian is a potential soldier. Every human child is a potential threat. Every human building is a potential fortress. He took another drink. The second thing you need to understand is that humans don't care about winning battles. They care about making sure their enemies can never win the war. One of the cadets started to speak, but Zethka held up a hand. And the third thing, he continued, the most important thing is that humans don't fight to live. They live to fight. When you corner most species, they surrender to save their lives. When you corner humans, they find new ways to hurt you even as they die. The cantina had grown completely silent now. Even the server had stopped moving, standing frozen with a tray of drinks in her hands. Over the next few hours, Zethka said, I'm going to tell you about 3 battles. 3 times when the mighty Valorian military faced off against primitive human forces. 3 times when we achieved total tactical victory and somehow lost something much more important. He looked at each cadet in turn. You came here wanting stories of glory and honor. What you're going to get instead are the reasons why I wake up screaming 3 times a week, 15 years after the war ended. The tallest cadet swallowed hard. Sir, maybe we should— No, Zethka interrupted. You wanted to hear about human warfare? You're going to hear about it. Because tomorrow you'll graduate and get your first assignment. And someday you might face humans again. When that day comes, you need to understand what you're really fighting. He finished his second drink and began his story. Outside the cantina, the lights of Harmony's Edge twinkled like stars, peaceful and calm. But inside, 3 young warriors were about to learn that some victories were worse than any defeat. It started at Terra's garden, Zethka said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. A simple farming world. 30,000 civilians, maybe 500 soldiers. We had 5,000 elite troops and air support. He stared at his empty glass. It should have been over in hours. Instead, it taught me that humans don't fight wars. They turn entire worlds into weapons and dare you to try to take them. Zethka ordered another drink and stared at the table for a long moment. The 3 cadets waited, no longer excited but unable to leave. Something in the commander's voice had changed, becoming distant and hollow. Terra's garden was supposed to be our first easy victory. He began. Intelligence reports said it was a farming colony. Rolling hills covered with grain fields, small towns scattered across 3 continents. No military bases, no weapon factories, no defensive positions. He looked up at the cadets. The plan was simple. We would land at dawn, secure the capital city, and accept the surrender of the colonial government by noon. Then we would move on to more important targets. The commander's first 2 arms gripped his new drink while his other 2 drummed nervously on the table. I remember standing in the command ship looking down at those peaceful green fields. My soldiers were joking about how easy it would be. Some bet they could finish the whole operation without firing a shot. One of the cadets shifted uncomfortably. What happened, sir? We landed exactly as planned, Zethka continued. 3 drop zones around the capital. No resistance at first. The human settlements looked empty, like everyone had run away. My troops spread out in standard formation, expecting to find hiding civilians and maybe a few local police with small arms. He took a sip of his drink. The first sign something was wrong came when Sergeant Vorthal stepped on what looked like a child's toy. It exploded and took his leg off. Not just any explosive, it was made from farming chemicals, the kind used to help plants grow. The cadets exchanged glances. Using farming supplies as weapons sounded impossible. Then we started finding the bodies, Zethka said quietly. Human bodies, but not fresh ones. They had been dead for days, maybe weeks. Men, women, children, all arranged in their homes like they were still alive. Still sitting at dinner tables, still lying in their beds. His voice grew even quieter. But they were rigged with explosives. Motion sensors, pressure plates, even simple tripwires. The humans had turned their own dead into traps. The tallest cadet looked sick. Sir, that's not possible. No species would do that to their own dead. That's what I thought too, Zethka replied. But humans don't think like us. Death doesn't end their usefulness as soldiers. It just changes their mission. He continued his story. We advanced toward the town center, losing soldiers to hidden bombs and sniper fire. But we couldn't see the snipers. Every shot came from a different location. It took us hours to realize that the shooters were children, some as young as 12 years old. They would fire once, then disappear into tunnels under the town. The second cadet frowned. Children soldiers? That violates every law of warfare. Humans don't follow our laws, Zethka said. They make their own rules. And rule number 1 is that everyone fights. Age doesn't matter. Training doesn't matter. If you can hold a weapon, you're a soldier. He described how his forces had slowly pushed into the town, taking heavy casualties from improvised weapons and hidden traps. Every building was a fortress. Every street was a killing ground. Farm equipment had been turned into armored vehicles. Irrigation systems had been converted into flamethrowers. By noon we had lost 300 soldiers, Zethka said. But we had reached the center of town. There was a large building there, probably the town hall. Intelligence said the local government would be inside, ready to surrender. His hands began to shake slightly as he held his drink. The building was quiet when we approached. Too quiet. My soldiers were nervous, expecting another trap. I ordered them to surround the building and call for the humans to come out. He paused for a long moment. That's when we heard the crying. The cadets leaned forward despite themselves. It was coming from underneath the building. Children crying, calling for their parents. My soldiers looked at me, waiting for orders. The crying got louder, more desperate. Zethka's voice cracked slightly. I ordered them to break down the door and search for survivors. Standard procedure: rescue civilians, secure the area, establish control. He finished his drink in one gulp. Inside, we found stairs leading down to a basement. The crying was coming from down there. My lead squad went down first, weapons ready but set to stun. They were trying to be careful, trying to save lives. The commander's 4 arms were all shaking now. The basement was full of human families. Parents and children huddled together in the darkness. But something was wrong. The parents weren't moving. They were dead, had been for days. But the children were alive, trapped underneath the bodies. One of the cadets started to speak, but Zethka held up a hand. My soldiers moved forward to help the children. They grabbed the dead parents to pull them away. That's when I realized what the humans had done. His voice dropped to a whisper. The dead parents had been turned into bombs. Not just strapped with explosives, filled with them. When my soldiers moved the bodies, the pressure triggers activated. The cantina was completely silent. Even the background music had stopped. The explosion killed 12 of my best soldiers instantly, Zethka continued. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing that the children weren't trapped by accident. They had been placed there deliberately. The humans had used their own children as bait. The third cadet looked like he was going to be sick. But why? Why would they sacrifice their own children? Because they weren't trying to save the children, Zethka said. They were trying to teach us a lesson. They wanted us to understand that taking Terra's garden would require us to kill every human on the planet, including the children, including the ones who were already dead. He signaled for another drink with one shaking hand. We spent 3 more days on Terra's garden. Every building we entered was a trap. Every civilian we tried to save was rigged to explode. Every act of mercy cost us soldiers. The server brought his drink but didn't make eye contact. Word had spread through the cantina about what the scarred Valorian was discussing. By the end of the 4th day, we had lost nearly half our force, Zethka said. But we had won. The human resistance had stopped. The planet was ours, he laughed bitterly. Except it wasn't really ours. The humans had poisoned the water systems before they died. They had burned the crops and salted the fields. They had destroyed every piece of infrastructure that might be useful to an occupying force. The cadets stared at him in horror. We held Terra's garden for 6 months, Zethka continued. During that time it produced nothing, fed no one, provided no resources. It was just a ball of dirt in space with our soldiers standing guard over empty ruins. He took another drink, and every night we could hear them. Human voices in the wind, singing lullabies and telling stories. The few survivors had built a network of tunnels under the planet. They couldn't fight us anymore, but they could remind us that they were still there, still watching, still waiting. The commander looked at each cadet in turn. That was my first lesson in human warfare. They don't fight to win territory. They fight to make sure their enemies can never use what they've taken. They turn victory into a curse that follows you forever. He finished his drink and set the glass down with a sharp click. Terra's garden was just the beginning. At Proxima Station, I learned that humans don't just sacrifice their dead. They sacrifice the living too, and they make you watch while they do it. The server had stopped coming to their table. Other patrons in the cantina had either left or moved to tables farther away. Zethka didn't seem to notice. His 4 eyes stared at something the cadets couldn't see, lost in memories from 15 years ago. Proxima Station was different, he said finally. It wasn't a farming world or a quiet colony. It was humanity's main military headquarters in the outer systems. A massive space station with defensive platforms, fighter squadrons, and a full battle fleet. The tallest cadet tried to sound normal. That sounds more like a proper military target, sir. It was, Zethka agreed. Finally, we thought we would face real soldiers instead of farmers with bombs. The Galactic Council sent a full invasion fleet. 200 ships, including 6 dreadnoughts. My ground forces were backup. We would board the station after the fleet battle was won. He ordered another drink, his 5th of the night. His speech was still clear, but his hands shook more with each glass. The human fleet was smaller than ours, maybe 60 ships, most of them converted civilian vessels. Our admirals were confident. Valorian warships had never lost a space battle against equal numbers. Against a force 3 times larger, it should have been a massacre. Zethka laughed, but the sound was harsh and bitter. It was a massacre, just not the one we expected. The second cadet leaned forward. Did the humans have some kind of secret weapon? Yes, Zethka said. They had themselves. He began describing the battle, his voice taking on the distant tone of someone reciting a nightmare. The engagement started normally. Both fleets formed battle lines and began exchanging fire. Our weapons were better, our shields stronger, our tactics superior. The commander's drink arrived, but he ignored it. For the first hour, everything went according to plan. We destroyed 12 human ships and lost only 2 of our own. The human fleet was retreating, pulling back toward Proxima Station. Our admirals ordered a pursuit. His voice grew quieter. That's when the humans did something no military academy had ever taught us to expect. They started ramming. The cadets looked confused. Sir, ramming attacks haven't been used for centuries. They're suicide missions. Exactly, Zethka said. The humans turned their retreat into a trap. As our ships moved forward to finish them off, damaged human vessels would suddenly change course and slam into our larger ships, not trying to escape or survive, just trying to take us with them. He picked up his drink with one shaking hand. The first ram caught us completely off guard. A human destroyer, already on fire and venting atmosphere, turned around and plowed straight into the bridge of a Valorian cruiser. Both ships exploded instantly. The third cadet shook his head. But that's insane. Why throw away lives for one enemy ship? Because humans don't think about individual battles, Zethka explained. They think about the war. They knew they couldn't win the fleet engagement, so they decided to make winning cost us more than losing cost them. He continued the story, describing how the human ramming attacks had thrown the Valorian fleet into confusion. Captains didn't know how to respond to enemies who attacked by destroying themselves. Then the human evacuation ships arrived, Zethka said. Medical vessels, cargo haulers, even passenger liners. They were supposed to be rescuing survivors from damaged human warships. His voice cracked. But they weren't evacuating. They were boarding. The cadets stared at him in confusion. The humans had filled their evacuation ships with soldiers, Zethka explained. They would dock with damaged Valorian vessels under the pretense of offering medical aid. When our crews opened the airlocks to help wounded enemies, armed humans would pour through. He took a long drink. But that still wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what they broadcast while they did it. Zethka's forearms wrapped around his drink like he was holding onto something precious. Every human ship as it died would transmit personal messages. Not military communications or tactical data. Personal messages. His voice became almost inaudible. Names and ages of every crew member. Pictures of their families. Messages from their children saying goodbye. Stories about their lives, their dreams, their hopes. The cantina had grown completely silent again. Even the background noise from the kitchen had stopped. They made us listen, Zethka whispered. As we killed them, they made us hear about who they were. Not just soldiers or enemies, but people. Individuals with lives and families and reasons for fighting. One of the cadets tried to speak, but no words came out. I remember one transmission, Zethka continued. A human fighter pilot named Sarah Chen. Her ship was crippled, life support failing, but she was still alive. Instead of begging for mercy or trying to escape, she started singing. His hands were shaking so badly now that he could barely hold his drink. It was a lullaby. something she used to sing to her daughter. The transmission kept playing as she guided her dying ship into the engine bay of our flagship. He laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. She wasn't just trying to damage our ship. She was trying to haunt us, to make sure that every time we celebrated victory, we would remember the sound of a mother singing to a child she would never see again. The second cadet found his voice. "Sir, why didn't you just stop listening to the transmissions?" "Because they weren't just playing on our communication channels," Zethka said. "They were broadcasting on every frequency. Emergency channels, navigation beacons, even the background radiation from their engines. You couldn't escape it." He described how the battle had continued for 18 hours, far longer than any space engagement in recorded history. Human ships kept fighting long after they should have been destroyed, held together by nothing but human stubbornness and improvised repairs. By the end, Zethka said, we had achieved total victory. The human fleet was destroyed. Proxima Station was ours. We had lost 30 ships, but we had won. His voice became hollow. Except we hadn't really won anything. Proxima Station was empty. The humans had evacuated everyone before the battle even started. We had fought for 18 hours and lost 30 ships to capture an empty building in space. The third cadet frowned. "But sir, surely capturing their main base was strategically important?" "Was it?" Zethka asked. "The station had no strategic value without people to run it. No intelligence to gather without computers to access. No symbolic victory without enemies to surrender." He finished his drink in one gulp. And meanwhile, every Valorian warrior who survived that battle was forever changed. We had learned that humans don't fight to protect military assets. They fight to teach lessons, and the lesson at Proxima Station was simple. Zethka looked at each cadet in turn. Humans will sacrifice anything, even their own lives, to make sure you can never enjoy what you've taken from them. They turn every victory into a hollow prize that tastes like ashes in your mouth. He signaled for another drink, his sixth of the night. But even that wasn't the end of my education in human warfare. The final lesson came at Earth itself, where I learned that humans don't just sacrifice their possessions and their people, they sacrifice their entire world rather than let their enemies have it. The server approached with his drink, moving carefully like she was afraid to get too close. The scarred Valorian took the glass without looking at her, his eyes still fixed on something the cadets couldn't see. After Proxima Station, the human government offered to negotiate, Zethka said. They said they were ready to discuss surrender terms. The Galactic Council was suspicious, but they agreed to talks. He took a sip of his new drink. That's when we learned that humans had been lying from the very beginning. There never was a human government ready to surrender. There never was a human military command willing to negotiate. His voice dropped to a whisper. There was only Earth, one planet prepared to show us what humans really do when they're cornered. Zethka was drunk now, but his voice remained steady. The three cadets had long since stopped asking questions. They simply sat and listened, trapped by the horror of what they were hearing but unable to leave. Earth looked defenseless when we arrived, Zethka began. No orbital defense platforms, no fleet guarding the system, no military satellites or weapons arrays, just one blue planet spinning quietly in space. He stared at his drink without touching it. Our scouts reported normal civilian traffic, ships moving between Earth and its moon. Cargo haulers bringing supplies to orbital stations, passenger liners carrying tourists. Everything looked peaceful and normal. The commander's voice took on that distant quality again. The Galactic Council had assembled the largest invasion force in history. 1 million ground troops from 12 different species. 500 ships, enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. He laughed bitterly. We thought we were being careful. We thought we were prepared for anything humans might try. The tallest cadet shifted uncomfortably. By now he knew that whatever the Valorian forces had expected, reality had been much worse. The landing went perfectly. Zethka continued. No resistance at all. We established beachheads on 3 continents simultaneously. My forces took the largest human city on the eastern continent, a place called New Geneva. He picked up his drink but only held it, not drinking. The city was empty but intact. No signs of battle, no evidence of evacuation. The humans had simply vanished. Left behind were their homes, their possessions, their entire civilization. Zethka's forearms trembled slightly. At first, we thought they had fled to underground shelters. Standard procedure for civilian populations during orbital bombardment. My troops began searching building by building, expecting to find hidden bunkers full of scared families. His voice grew quieter. Instead, we found the bodies. The cadets waited in silence. Not fresh bodies, Zethka clarified. Old ones. Humans who had been dead for months, maybe years. But they weren't random deaths. They were arranged, organized, displayed. He took a small sip of his drink. In one building, we found a human family sitting around a dinner table. Parents and 3 children, all dead but perfectly preserved. The table was set for a meal that had never been eaten. The second cadet found his voice. Preserved how? Chemicals, Zethka said. The humans had turned their own bodies into art installations, messages for whoever came after them. Each scene told a story about human life, human love, human loss. He continued describing the empty city. Every building contained similar scenes. Humans who had died naturally but been arranged by the survivors to create a museum of humanity itself. We found a school where dead human children sat at their desks, hands raised as if asking questions. A hospital where dead patients lay in beds, surrounded by dead doctors and nurses. A library where a dead librarian sat reading to dead children. Zethka's voice cracked. But the most disturbing part wasn't the bodies. It was the sounds. The third cadet frowned. Sounds? Music, Zethka said. Recordings playing throughout the city on hidden speakers. Children laughing, adults talking, the sounds of normal human life. But there was no one left alive to make those sounds. He described how his forces had advanced through the city, unsettled by the combination of perfect preservation and absolute silence. The human voices follow them everywhere, creating the illusion of a living city inhabited only by the dead. That's when we triggered the first defense system, Zethka said. Not weapons in the traditional sense. Something much worse. His hands began shaking again. The buildings themselves were alive. Not in any way we understood, but somehow aware of our presence. Doors would close behind us. Elevators would stop working. Lights would go out section by section. He took another sip. And then the real killing started. Zethka explained how the seemingly empty city had been transformed into a vast trap. Every piece of human technology had been reprogrammed. Every system converted into a weapon. Air conditioning units released poison gas. Water systems delivered acid instead of liquid. Even simple door handles were electrified to lethal levels. But the worst part, he said, was that the systems couldn't tell the difference between human and alien life signs. Whatever the humans had done to their city, it was designed to kill everything that moved. His voice became almost inaudible. We realized that any humans who had stayed behind to activate these systems would have died along with us. They had turned their own city into a death trap that couldn't distinguish between friend and enemy. The cantina had emptied during his story. Only the 3 cadets remained, along with the server who stood frozen behind the bar. My troops fought building by building, floor by floor, Zethka continued. Not against human soldiers, but against the city itself. Every room was a puzzle designed to kill us. Every hallway was a maze that led nowhere. He finished his drink and immediately signaled for another. We lost 3,000 soldiers taking a city that had no defenders, no strategic value, no military purpose except to prove that humans would rather destroy their own civilization than let enemies enjoy it. The 7th drink arrived. Zethka's speech was becoming slightly slurred, but his memories remained crystal clear. After 6 days, we finally reached the center of New Geneva, he said. There was a park there with trees and grass and a small pond. In the middle of the park was a building that looked different from the others. He paused for a long moment. It was a nursery, a place where human parents brought their young children to play and learn. Zethka's voice became barely audible. Inside, we found the final message the humans had left for us. The cadets leaned forward despite themselves. The nursery was full of recording devices. Zethka whispered. Thousands of them. Each one contained a message from human parents to their children. Goodbye messages, final words. Love letters to sons and daughters they would never see again. His 4 arms wrapped around his new drink like he was trying to hold himself together. But the children weren't dead. The recordings made that clear. The parents had sent their children away, somewhere safe before they died defending the city. He looked up at the cadets with eyes that seemed infinitely old. The humans had sacrificed themselves, their city, their entire world, just to buy time for their children to escape. And they wanted us to know it. Zethka laughed, but the sound was broken and hollow. The recording devices were rigged to motion sensors. Every time one of my soldiers entered the room, another message would play. Another human parent saying goodbye to a child who was somewhere else, somewhere safe, somewhere we couldn't reach. His voice cracked completely. We spent 2 hours in that nursery, listening to thousands of final messages, hearing the voices of people we had killed, talking to children we would never find. He took a large gulp of his drink. That's when I realized what the humans had really done. They hadn't just defended Earth, they had turned it into a memorial, a tomb, a message that would haunt anyone who conquered it. The commander looked at each cadet in turn. We held Earth for 2 years after that. During that time it produced nothing, fed no one, served no purpose except to remind us of what we had destroyed to capture it. He finished his drink in one gulp, and every night in every city we occupied we could hear them. Human voices singing lullabies to children who weren't there, parents telling bedtime stories to empty rooms, the sound of a civilization saying goodbye to itself. Zethka signaled for another drink, his 8th of the night, but even that wasn't the end of it, because as we were learning what humans had done to Earth, we discovered something even worse. His voice dropped to a whisper. The evacuation ships we had been ignoring, thinking they carried only civilian refugees, had been carrying something else entirely. The cantina was almost completely dark now. The server had turned off most of the lights hours ago, but she hadn't asked them to leave. Zethka sat hunched over his 8th drink, looking smaller than a Valorian warrior should ever look. The 3 cadets remained frozen in their seats, trapped by a story they couldn't escape. The evacuation ships, Zethka said slowly, carried more than refugees. His voice was slurred now, but still clear enough to understand. While we were fighting for empty cities and dead worlds, those ships were carrying the real prize. Not just human civilians, but human knowledge, their entire civilization, compressed into data cores and hidden in the hulls of cargo vessels. He took a sip of his drink. Scientists, engineers, artists, teachers. The humans had saved their best and brightest while leaving behind volunteers to die defending worthless territory. The tallest cadet tried to speak but found his throat too dry. He had been sitting in silence for hours, listening to horrors that no military academy had prepared him for. But that wasn't the worst part, Zethka continued. The worst part was what else those ships carried. He looked up at the cadets with bloodshot eyes. Children, millions of human children, saved while their parents died to slow us down. Children who would grow up knowing exactly what we had done to their families, their homes, their entire species. The commander laughed, but it sounded more like crying. The humans hadn't just evacuated their population. They had created the next generation of human warriors, children raised on stories of sacrifice and revenge, children who would never forget what the Galactic Council had taken from them. Zethka finished his drink and stared at the empty glass. That's when the Galactic Council finally understood what we had really accomplished. We hadn't defeated humanity. We had educated them. He signaled for another drink, but the server shook her head and pointed to the closed sign. The cantina had been officially closed for 2 hours, but no one had dared interrupt the scarred veteran's story. The war ended 6 months later, Zethka said, not because we won and not because humans surrendered. It ended because the council realized that continuing to fight would only make things worse. The 2nd cadet found his voice. But sir, we had won every battle. We controlled their territory. How could continuing make things worse? Zethka looked at him with something like pity. Because we had learned what humans do when they're cornered. They don't just fight back, they evolve. Every tactic we used against them, they adapted to and improved. Every weapon we deployed, they found ways to turn against us. He struggled to his feet, swaying slightly. The council was faced with a choice. We could keep fighting and eventually kill every human in the galaxy, but that would mean becoming the kind of monsters who slaughter entire species. Or we could accept that humans had taught us something about the true cost of victory. The commander began walking toward the exit, the cadets following uncertainly behind him, so we negotiated a withdrawal. We gave humans the Outer Rim territories and agreed to leave them alone. The history books call it a victory, but everyone who was there knows the truth. He stopped at the door and turned back to look at them. We didn't defeat humanity. We discovered that defeating humanity would require us to become something worse than human. The cold night air hit them as they stepped outside. The lights of Harmony's Edge stretched out below them, peaceful and quiet. But somehow the darkness felt different now, full of unseen threats and hidden dangers. Sir, the 3rd cadet said hesitantly, why are you telling us this? Why didn't the Academy teach us about human warfare? Zethka smiled, but there was no humor in it. Because the Academy wants to train warriors, not traumatize children. They think if they don't talk about humans, maybe we'll never have to face them again. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. When he activated it, a holographic image appeared in the air between them. It showed a young human girl, maybe 8 years old, with dark hair and bright eyes. "This is Sarah Chen," Zethka said quietly, "the daughter of the fighter pilot who died at Proxima Station. The one who sang lullabies as she rammed our flagship." The cadet stared at the image in confusion. "Sir, how do you have a picture of her?" "Because I've been tracking her," Zethka said. "For 15 years I've watched her grow up in the Outer Rim colonies. She's 23 now, an engineer working on new ship designs. Peaceful work, building homes for human refugees." He deactivated the hologram and put the device back in his pocket. "But she hasn't forgotten what happened to her mother. None of them have. The human children who escaped are adults now, and they're building something new out there in the dark." The commander looked up at the stars. "Someday, probably in your lifetimes, humans will return to this part of the galaxy. When they do, they won't be the same species we fought 15 years ago. They'll be something new, something that learned from every mistake they made, every battle they lost, every sacrifice they were forced to make." He started walking away, then paused and looked back one more time. "The Academy wants you to be ready for that day. They think training in tactics and superior firepower will be enough. But I'm telling you the truth. When humans come back, they won't be coming to fight a war." His voice carried clearly in the cold night air. "They'll be coming to teach us the final lesson. The one about what happens to species who force humans to evolve." Zethka disappeared into the darkness, leaving the 3 cadets standing alone under the stars. They remained there for a long time, not speaking, each lost in their own thoughts about what they had heard. Finally, the tallest cadet broke the silence. "Do you think he's right? About humans coming back?" The second cadet shivered, and not just from the cold. "I don't know. But I know one thing. I never want to find out what humans learned from fighting us." The third cadet looked up at the stars, wondering which of those distant lights might be hiding human colonies. Maybe that was the point of his story, to make sure we never have to. They walked back to their dormitory in silence, each carrying the weight of knowledge they wished they had never gained. Behind them, the cantina went completely dark, but the echoes of Zethka's words seemed to linger in the night air. Somewhere in the Outer Rim, Sarah Chen was probably looking up at the same stars, working on designs for ships that might someday carry humans back to the worlds they had lost. But whether those ships would come in peace or war was a question that haunted the dreams of every veteran who remembered what humans were capable of when they had nothing left to lose. The 3 cadets would graduate the next day and receive their first assignments. They would serve with honor, fight with courage, and protect the galaxy from threats both known and unknown. But they would never forget the night they learned that some victories were worse than any defeat, and that the most dangerous enemies were the ones who taught you what you were truly capable of becoming. In his quarters, Zethka sat staring at the hologram of Sarah Chen, raising one last glass to the memory of enemies who had shown him that humanity's greatest weapon was never their technology or their tactics. It was their willingness to pay any price, make any sacrifice, become anything necessary to protect what they loved and punish those who threatened it. And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, that lesson waited patiently for its next students.